Girls of Reddit who have rejected people. What's the worst way someone has taken it? My sister got followed home by a dude she rejected. He went up to the house and started talking to her kids and telling them he was their new dad. Luckily, real dad came out in his police attire. Put a real quick end to that. Edit. Want to clear up some confusion. My sister and the real dad are married, not divorced or anything. The guy followed her home from the hospital she works at, where he was a patient under her care. He made a move on her. She said no. There was no relationship between them besides nurse/patient. Well, maybe not in his eyes. I refer to my brother-in-law as my brother, mostly cause I'm too lazy to type it out, but also cause he's been in my life since I was a little kid. Brother was not threatening the man as a cop, but instead as a father. He just happened to be getting ready to leave for work at the same time. The guy ended up getting transferred to another hospital to be closer to his family after complications from overdosing. This is a slightly different take, but I turned a guy down for a date and he then posted a long snap story about how much he loves his wife that he had neglected to mention all that time. Called me an ugly whore and said no one would ever want to me. He didn't like when I asked how I could both be unable and a whore. I had actually heard of a lot of people doing this before, but I'd never had it happen to me, and when it did it was completely devastating. He told me I had to go out with him, or he would kill himself. He then said goodbye, very convincingly and emotionally, and turned his phone off/stopped picking up or answering any texts. I knew him from when we went to high school together, and so I actually had his best mates and his dad's phone numbers. I phoned them and sent the screenshots of the messages to them. Absolutely hysterical and worrying that he was in a gutter somewhere. However, it was very quickly discovered by his livid father that he was actually round a mate smoking weed, and he thought that this would at least get him a pity shag. What a complete and utter twat. We went on one date and I declined a second. A couple of days after that he called me and told me what I had been wearing that day. This went on for a couple of months. I'd literally never see him, but at least 3 times a week he'd know exactly what I wore. When I was a nanny, I was walking around with the baby in the pram, and we visited a bookshop. A man in there started talking to me, and then asked me out. Very kindly, keeping my father's advice in mind about being kind when I have to reject men when they ask me out. I said that was a nice offer, but my boyfriend might not to be too keen on it. His response to that was to lean in and try and kiss me. I told him to get the off me. He then exploded with rage and started screaming in my face. I was saved by the bookstore employee. The man stormed out of the shop. I spent the next few hours shaking like a leaf. What a champion. He was 15 at the time, and although the rejection happened over the phone, he was so irate that he illegally drove a car to the nearest place he knew to where my house was. I'd once told him I lived near the hospital and waited there demanding I give him more accurate directions to my house. In retrospect, I probably should have been more terrified than I was. By getting nudes from another girl, cropping her face out, and showing them to everybody saying it was me. He broke into my house and chased me into my bedroom, then spent 10 minutes shouting through my locked bedroom door that I should come out and have a reasonable conversation with him, adult to adult. He shoved me into a wall and busted my head open. I was taking a break at work behind the building listening to music and enjoying the breeze, and coworker I constantly tried to avoid because he was a creep started asking me out. I'd already been irritated because of customers and the overbearing heat inside, so instead of the usual brush off reply, I snapped at him and made it clear I was in no way interested, had a boyfriend whom I loved, and that he needed to get the out of my personal space. I went to walk away, and he grabbed my arm to twist me around trying to back me against the wall, and when I managed to finally rip my arm away and press him back to get him off me, he got shoved me. Back of my head hit the wall, split open about 1.5 inches, bled a lot, had to get about 7 stitches. He got fired and also arrested for assault. He tried to say I had hit him first, but luckily there was a camera around back that caught the whole thing. Edit. Okay, I did not think this would blow up like it did, and I went through the thread and thought I'd address some things. I apologize if advance for this next wall of text, but I'm on mobile. I was 19 when this happened, and he was 21. No one really liked him cause he was a and thought he knew better than everyone, even though he half-assed everything and constantly got in people's way. He also asked out every female worker multiple times and was really about it. Made us all extremely uncomfortable just to be around him because he didn't seem to understand personal space. When it came to anyone female, we were all constantly telling him to back off. We worked the same shift cause he kept getting rotated around for problems, and finally they left him where he was cause he only harassed me, and I was the only one who didn't seem bothered. I didn't complain, which I realized later I should have, cause it might have gotten him fired sooner before this all went down. Because I was the only female on shift he'd always try to get with me. It never worked, and I found ways to keep my distance. The day he busted my head open, the heat and long day combined, and I snapped at him instead of just walking away like normal, which was something he obviously hadn't been expecting, and so he grabbed me and tried to hold me back while he yelled about me being a. I ended up with a bruise, shaped like his hand, that I didn't notice till I got to the hospital. After he shoved me and I hit the wall, I started yelling at him, and he was freaking out a bit cause for once I was actively standing up for myself, and he started to realize what he'd just done. He only flipped out for real and started apologizing a mile a minute. When I reached back and my hand came back covered in blood, I went inside still yelling at him, and our manager came over to snap at me until I told him what happened and showed him my bloody hand. He turned me to check out my head and panicked. Unfortunately for the idiot still apologizing, our uniform shirt was white and the back of mine wasn't anymore. I know head wounds bleed a lot, but it looked like I'd been hurt worse than I was. I even freaked out at how much blood there was once I took off the shirt. I got taken to the hospital and the cops were called and they arrested him later. We found out he was on probation, for punching his girlfriend in the face earlier in the year and kicking her dog around afterwards. He was in jail for a good 7 years after the fact. All I did was give a report on what had happened, and the tape proved my story. I never went to court. I was 19 and this really wasn't that big a deal to me. The injury wasn't that bad. I was in the hospital longer for questioning than anything else. I was almost completely stitched up before the police even came. All I had was a tiny hairline fracture, not even a concussion. I was more off than anything. I didn't even think to sue, but I had bigger things to deal with at that point in my life than some idiot at work, and I sort of just moved on after everything. In high school I turned a guy down, so he went around spreading rumors that he tried to me, but my vagina was deformed and practically closed up. He spent the rest of the year talking about how nasty I was, unclean, unshaven, etc. Sometime about 5 years ago, he tried to add me on Facebook and I blocked him. That guy, I spent months trying to convince people I knew how to wash my hole. I turned down a guy that was known for being the popular guy, and I thought he was a bit of a head. When he tried to kiss me, I turned my head the other way, said I wasn't interested and walked off. He grabbed my hand, spat in my face, and said I missed the best opportunity in my life, and the only reason he tried to kiss me was because he pitied me. I'd gone out with a guy once that I'd met through a dating site, and we just didn't click. I told him exactly that, was very respectful of his feelings, and wished him the best. He was not receptive at all. He called me a whore, told me that he was going to find where I lived, and push me into oncoming traffic. Really awful things. He wouldn't stop texting me horrible stuff about how I was a total fool leading him on, and that he hoped that someone raped me. I blocked his number, which thankfully stopped the messages, reported him onto the dating app, and thankfully never heard from him again. It was legit one of the scariest frigging things. Dude was unhinged. Guy asked me out during an Uber pool ride. I told him I wasn't interested, and he started moving closer and asking me why I wasn't interested and what was wrong with him. It was uncomfortable to say the least. My Uber driver, for some reason, thought it was hilarious to see me pressed against the door to try and get away from this random guy invading my personal space. Thankfully no one has threatened my life. He sent me an email with a 3-page essay attached. It was written entirely in third person recounting his first rejection by a girl named Tania at the age of 16. There were a lot of solitary beach walks, she's the perfect girl talk, him not talking no for answer, and the story eventually ends with him drinking antifreeze, slipping into a coma, hospitalized and eventually recuperating, only to tell Portania that she could avoided his and his parents' pain by agreeing to date him. The email said, "So you know what you are getting into. I was 19 and did not see this extreme level of crazy coming, but knew I needed to really make how I felt clear. I immediately called him to reiterate that I do not want to be with him. I no longer want to be friends with him, and if he contacted me again I would change my number. I'll let a friend of his know what was going on." 5 days later he called from a different number to tell me he was out in the country, one with a gun to his head, and if I didn't agree to be with him then and there he was pulling the trigger. I lied and convinced him I had to leave because I had a family emergency, aunt sick in the hospital, but we would talk the next day. Had mutual friend call him and report back as is suspected he was full of. Sure enough I was right, he was totally fine. He called the next day and with the most sing-song creepy serial killer tone said, "You think you're so nice. What type of human being doesn't agree to what someone needs when they tell you they are going to kill themselves? You piece of..." I lost the plot. Told him I am changing my numbers and the next time he contacts me, it will be the police involved. He just laughed the whole time and told me he hopes I die alone, like I deserve. Radio silence for 6 years until I'm getting married. I have an email from him. "Hey. Wow, it's been a while. How are you? Would be so great to catch up sometime. King psychotic hole." Obviously I never replied and changed my email again. I also once had a guy send me hundreds of text messages calling me all kinds of names, cursing me out, and threatening me because I didn't have sex with him after our entirely lackluster first and last date. I didn't even bother reading beyond the first 50. Just let him go on and on until I blocked and mass deleted. Still, it was nuts. Chased my car down the major city street as I drove away, running after me until he collapsed in the road, called me dozens of times, eventually blaming everyone from my little brother to my dentist for breaking us up, then flew to his hometown the next day and committed suicide. His extreme clinginess and jealousy was the reason for my decision to take a break, and though clearly I made the right decision, I felt terribly guilty for years. Back in high school, he pretended to want the same friendship I was looking for. He ended up locking me in his room, threw my phone out of reach, and sexually assaulted me until I worked my way free. As I sat in my car, he casually walked out, handed me my phone, telling me he'd text me later, and I got to learn to live with him in classes while he acted like nothing ever happened. Edit. I expected this to get buried, but I wanted to clear up what happened afterwards. I didn't report him because I considered him such a good friend for a considerably long time. The experience, luckily, did not amount to rape, which is why I'm using the term sexual assault. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure it was sexual assault. Things like, maybe I asked for it, or I'm just overreacting, ran through my mind. It was a year afterward when I finally came to the realization, and by that time I both didn't care and, sorry to say this, didn't want to see a kid who was successful in college and in a healthy long-term relationship be brought down by rumors. Not what I want to call it, but what a majority of the world would today. This isn't a great answer, but it's the only answer I have for my inaction.